Fellow human beings, PowerGamer here. Just because you enjoy something that everyone says killed a beloved icon doesn't mean you can't also enjoy said beloved icon, right? Okay, I probably should have worded that better.
Spyro the Dragon, the coolest purple thing since getting injured in the line of duty. I've briefly discussed Spyro when I looked over Skylanders back in the beginning, but I think it's time we go into a bit more detail with this little guy, since he's arguably one of the most popular platforming mascots ever created. Like many other beloved folktales, our story begins with Disruptor, the first title ever made by Insomniac Games. It was a first-person shooter made for the PlayStation, and it did not sell very well. Shocking, I know, given how much of a household name it is today, but its reception was quite positive, so Universal Interactive Entertainment approached Insomniac for making their next game. The idea for a dragon to be the main character was pitched by artist Craig Stitt, and it was originally going to be much darker and more realistic, but the game's producer, Mark Cerny, yes, the same one that used to work for Sega, suggested they make it more lighthearted and kid-friendly. Don't worry, we get that darker version someday. Apparently, Spyro's name was originally going to be Pete, but they worried about copyright issues thanks to this thing. They initially changed it to Pyro, but then settled on Spyro because an S just makes things much more friendly, like with the word witch, or ink, or submarine, or hit. And he was originally going to be green, but they made him purple to help him stand out more from the environment. The game was unique in that it used a 3D panoramic engine that could display varying levels of detail, which allowed for further draw distance than most other games at the time, something that many other games would do in the future. And at the time, Insomniac had a close relationship with Naughty Dog since their offices were right next to each other, so the developers would frequently collaborate with each other, to the point where Insomniac even included a demo for Crash 3 in Spyro, and Naughty Dog put a demo for Spyro in Crash 3. Spyro the Dragon was released for the PS1 on September 9th, 1998, and while sales were pretty slow at first, it eventually sold over 4.8 million copies, making it one of the best-selling games on the PlayStation. Reception was quite positive, with many people calling it an impressive step forward for 3D platformers as a whole, and today it is still regarded as a classic. It got 2 sequels released on the PlayStation that also did really well, and Spyro was considered one of the primary mascots for the PS1 alongside Crash. And it's interesting because both would undergo nearly identical futures. Beloved trilogy on the PS1, hated 4th entry, decently liked 5th entry, solid GBA titles, terrible crossover, divisive beat-em-ups, showing up in Skylanders, original trilogy remastered. Yes, after the success of the Insane trilogy, Spyro got the same treatment with the Reignited trilogy, which was released in 2018 and developed by Toys for Bob. Yes, the same team that made Skylanders, the game everyone said ruined Spyro, was the one that brought him back. Oh, the irony.
As your resident Skylander defender who was old enough to know what Spyro was as a kid, yet never actually played any of the games, I love Spyro. The Reignited trilogy came out when I was a sophomore in high school, which I got as soon as I could, and I loved it. In fact, I had such a great time with it, I got all 3 of the games on the PS1 just so I could see them in their original form. But I have become much more versed in 3D platformers since then, so I wonder if Spyro 1 is still worth playing today. I'll mostly be looking at the Reignited trilogy since it looks better and has some nice quality of life improvements, though I will give some glances to the PS1 original. Get ready to turn up the heat and glide to victory because it's time we dive into the dragon.
The game opens with a news broadcast as a dragon is being interviewed. The dragon is asked about the threat of a villain known as Nasty Nork, and responds by saying he's simple, not a threat, and ugly. As a result, Nasty Nork, who is sadly watching this on TV, casts a spell that encases all the dragons in the world in crystal. That is, except for one purple dragon named Spyro, who avoided the blast due to being too small. So Spyro sets out on a quest to save the dragons, defeat Nasty Nork, and also recover the dragon's stolen treasure. It's a standard story you'd see in most platformers at the time, and it does its job well enough. This game looks pretty impressive for the PlayStation. The models are simple, but they still have some charm to them, and the animations are solid enough for the console. The environments are basic, but they look fine. Now, looking at the Reignited trilogy, I mean, talk about a glow-up. This game looks freaking gorgeous! It's so vibrant, the models are so unique, the animations are so expressive, and even the little details like Spyro can burn the grass! It's so good! This remaster is even more impressive than the Crash Bandicoot Insane trilogy. It just looks amazing. The only downside, though, is the frame rate can be kinda sluggish. This game doesn't stutter a whole lot, but it can be pretty distracting. Luckily, when it does happen, it's only for a second or two, so it's not a deal breaker. Could have done without all this motion blur, though. The music is overall pretty decent. It was composed by Stuart Copeland, who's the drummer for a band I've never heard of called The Police, and he did a pretty good job. Although I will admit a lot of the songs kind of blend together and not all of them are very memorable, but it is at least pleasant. But what's really cool is that the Reignited trilogy gives you the option of using the original songs or the remastered versions, and you can even give it a dynamic effect where it ramps up the faster you move. Voice acting, on the other hand, is a bit rough. Some of the dragons sound fine, but others are really awkward, and the same audio clips are reused multiple times. And Spyro himself is kinda annoying. He's voiced by Carlos Elizraki, who I think is a great voice actor, but the direction he was given just makes him sound kinda whiny.
Yeah, well, you could have found an easier spot to get stuck.
Thankfully, this issue was fixed in the Reignited trilogy. All of the characters sound great, and Spyro sounds much better.
Yeah, well, you could have found an easier spot to get stuck.
As for the game itself, it's pretty much your standard 3D collectathon platformer, but it does do some things to help it stand out from other titles of the genre.
You're placed in these large open levels and free to explore pretty much wherever you can get to. Your main objective is to find all of the dragons, and there's about 3 or 4 in each level. Just by touching them, you can break the spell and release them for their crystal prison. After that, they share some dialogue with you and then disappear. And wow, this was improved in the remaster, since the original was really basic. The dragons all looked the same, and while some gave you hints, a lot of them were just a whole bunch of nothing. Even if you've never played this game, I'm sure you're aware of this phrase.
Thank you for releasing me.
No joke, 15 dragons say this phrase, and again, many of them reuse the same voice clip. Thankfully, the remaster fixes this by giving each dragon a unique design and voiceover, and some even add new dialogue, which is really cool. Spyro's controls are very straightforward. This is one of the few PS1 games to allow for the DualShock, which is nice, and Spyro has 3 main abilities: charging, spinning fire, and gliding after a jump. Fire breath is used to kill enemies and break things, the gliding is used for exploration, and the charge is used for both. It can kill enemies, but if you charge and then jump, you gain some extra height, allowing you to glide to more areas. Well, at least in the remaster you can, because in the original, this thing was pathetic. Why is it so low? You can also zoom in to look around, but I almost never use this. Most of the enemies in this game go down in just one hit. A lot of the time you can fight them however you want, but enemies with armor can only be charged and large enemies can only be burned. And sometimes they even have both, so you need to be a bit more creative. You can also do this roll maneuver by hitting the shoulder buttons, but this is somehow even more useless than the kick from Mario 64. Spyro's health is represented by his dragonfly friend named Sparks. The magic item from Skylanders is based off an actual character. That's neat.
I'm sure I just gave many die-hard Spyro fans an aneurysm by saying that.
Sparks gives Spyro 3 extra hits. He starts out yellow, then he turns blue, then green, and then he just disappears altogether, meaning any hit will kill you. You can restore Sparks' energy by feeding him butterflies, which you get by killing small fodder animals like chickens, pigs, and of course, sheep. It's good to know sheep torture was always a part of this franchise, and as a bonus, in the Reignited trilogy, Sparks has legs, and if you stand still for long enough, he flies in front of the camera and waves to you, which is just adorable. Each dragon you save serves as a checkpoint. When you die, enemies respawn unless you pass a checkpoint after killing them, so thankfully you don't have to deal with them more than a few times. You have a limited amount of lives, and getting a game over sends you back to the start of the level, but you get a lot of extra ones thanks to these things you find lying around, and this meter that fills up by killing any enemies that respawn. Because of this, you're very unlikely to get a game over unless you have one part that just keeps screwing you up. But the combat is only a footnote in this game. The real focus is the collecting. In addition to the dragons, every world's full of gems. You'd think these would act like the coins from Mario, but no, they are a finite collectible in this game, and you want to grab them all if you want to complete it 100%. You find these out in the open by killing enemies or getting them inside chests. There's a lot of different types of chests in this game. You've got your normal ones that break easily, middle ones that need to be charged, these spinny ones you have to breathe fire on a couple of times and can even ride. These big ones with locks need a key, these ones you hit and jump to grab the gem, and these industrial ones you need something more powerful to break them like fireworks. And what's really nice is that if you just stand near the gem, Sparks will fly and grab it for you, which is a great motivation to keep Sparks alive since you don't have to be as precise with the gems. Honestly, gems are what you're going to spend most of your time going after in this game since finding the dragons is really easy. They can be hidden in some really obscure places and a lot of them are very easy to miss. But thankfully, the Reignited trilogy gives you the option to click the analog stick and have Sparks point you towards any missing gems, which is wonderful. The only other collectibles are the dragon eggs, which you get by chasing down these little bastards. But these are totally an afterthought since they're only in a few levels and all of them are in the first half of the game. You also have this guidebook, which allows you to check your progress in each level and even fast travel if you miss something.
There's a lot of collectibles in this game, and thankfully the levels themselves are pretty fun, but also kind of repetitive.
This game is divided into 6 separate areas, each with their own levels. But what's interesting is that the hub areas are levels in of themselves. They all have a bunch of dragons and gems to find, and you can very easily explore the entire thing and then do the other levels inside of them, or just do the other ones first and grab the stuff in these ones as you go, which makes the game a bit more replayable. Each area has 5 levels inside of them, 3 of which are your typical platforming level. You show up, run around looking for things, and when you've done everything you want to do, hop on this platform, which takes you back. The size of these levels is pretty impressive for the PS1, but sadly there's not much to do in here. The process of getting the dragons is almost always the same, so you'll see pretty much everything the game has to offer by the halfway point. The only things really added as you go are a couple of power-ups, like these fairies that kiss you, powering up your fire, and these speed ramps that let you supercharge, which makes you invincible and lets you jump larger distances. But this is where I must talk about the worst change in the Reignited trilogy. In the original, Spyro's legs would spin around all cartoony, but here he just runs faster. I'm sorry, but this is unacceptable. Goodbye. While it is a bit repetitive, the process of exploring the levels is really fun. It's cool seeing what all these different places have to offer, and finding the highest possible locations you can reach to see where you can glide to is honestly really satisfying. The other 2 levels change things up a bit. Each area has a boss level, and yeah, I'm just gonna say it right now, the boss fights in this game suck. They don't even feel like boss fights, they're just slightly bigger enemies you have to hit a few times and then they run away, so you chase them down. The only challenge comes from the fact that these levels have a bunch of enemies, 1 checkpoint, and usually no fodder to restore your health. Honestly, the gauntlets of enemies are the real boss fights in this game. The only type left is the flight level. levels. These levels allow you to fly infinitely. For some reason, Spyro can only do it here, it's never explained, and you have to either destroy stuff with your fire breath or go through something. There's 4 types of objects with 8 of each world. You only have a limited time, and getting an item adds 1 to 3 seconds to the clock. And if you want to get all the gems in the game, you need to get every single object in one go, but thankfully they're mostly organized in a line, so you just need to find the best order. After that, you can replay them to go for your best time. Gonna be honest, I hated these levels when I first played this game, because if there's one thing the remaster does worse than the original, it's the flight controls. The turning is way heavier, which makes it harder to be precise, and if you bump into anything, you instantly stop flying, which can cause you to run out of time or just fail instantly if you land in the water. You do get used to it after a while, but it can be really frustrating. As for the other changes the Reignited trilogy adds, despite the flying being much heavier, the control overall is a lot smoother and bouncier, which isn't too surprising given the much newer hardware. There's now a map feature which can be pulled up at any time in case you get lost. If you just miss landing on something while gliding, Spyro will pull himself up, which is really nice. They added skill points that act as achievements, and if you get them all, you get this cool concept art. And sadly, the loading time in between levels are much longer for some reason, and they took away this cute little animation of the gems flying into a chest for your total. But on the bright side, you can move Spyro around a bit, make him spit fire, flap his wings, and do barrel rolls. I use the rolling in these things more often than the actual levels.
Most of the levels in this game have varying themes and enemies, but aside from that, they aren't that much different from each other.
You start off in the Artisan's World, which is just a simple grassy area that serves as a nice introduction to the game's mechanics. Now let's head to Stone Hill, another grassy area that expands on it pretty well, and it's filled with crazy ranchers and giant goats. Next up is Dark Hollow, a giant library that's always at nighttime and introduces us to big and armored enemies. Town Square is a bunch of buildings with bulls and bullfighters, so this must mean the Spanish Inquisition is canon to the Spyro universe. Our first flight stage is Sunny Flights, where you have to find treasure chests, trains, arches, and planes. And the first boss is Toasty, whose level is filled with these annoying dogs that are infinitely more threatening than the quote-unquote boss. He's this large scarecrow that's revealed to be a sheep in a trench coat. Funny, but all he does is run away and let his dogs attack you. At the end of each world, you speak to a balloonist who won't let you pass unless you get a certain amount of collectibles, so you do have variety in which levels you need to beat, but nah, I'm just gonna get everything. Our next world is Peacekeepers, which places us in the desert. Got a bunch of enemies and tents and cannons you can fire, which is fun. Dry Canyon is just another desert level, but it does have some castles, so that's something. Yeah, this level's kinda dull. Clifftown is yet another desert, but at least the buildings and river make it more interesting. Night Flight has you find rings, treasure chests, arches, and lights. Ice Cavern shifts to the opposite theme from before, as this is an ice level, and thankfully the physics are pretty solid. Plus we have these big guys you need to knock off, which is really funny. The boss is Dr. Shemp, who has these giant ladies with spoons attack you, and then you just spray him in the back while he tries to hit you with a staff. Magic Crafters is one of my favorite areas, since it has a nice mountain aesthetic and these wizards that move platforms, which is really cool. This is further expanded upon in Alpine Ridge, which has a lot of platforming to do. High Caves is pretty similar, but it's the first level with an emphasis on the supercharge, which you need to reach certain areas and kill these giant melt spiders. Yeah, thanks for that game. Crystal Fight has rings, again, arches, again, treasure chests, again, and planes, again. Very original. Wizard Peak is a level full of wizards and has you go through this castle both from the inside and from above. The boss is Blowhard, a wizard guy that shoots tornadoes at you. At least his level's a bit more interesting with the moving platforms.
And do you want a great example of how limited the PlayStation 1 really was? This is what he looked like in the original. What even is that?
And we are halfway done. Beastmakers is a murky swamp filled with enemies that electrocute you. Terrace Village is a village, obviously, filled with these floors that hurt you if you touch them while the enemies zap them. It also has this firework that's nearly impossible to see. Misty Bog is a more open swamp area filled with frogs and killer trees, and you go down inside this log. That's kinda cool. Wild Flight has you get chests, because these are in literally all of them, planes, arches, of course, and boats. And then we reach the worst level in the game, Treetops. You have to run around these trees using the supercharge, and the layout is insanely confusing to navigate. You literally have to go backwards on one of the ramps at one point. It's miserable. And the original is even worse because of how pathetic the charge jump is. I literally spent over 10 minutes trying to make this stupid thing. I hate this level. The boss is a robot named Metalhead who shoots lasers and throws things at you. You want to break these rods, and I originally thought you had to make him hit them, but no, you can just charge them yourself. It also has this one little jump, and then the original took me over 15 minutes to make because I kept just barely missing it. Screw this terrible jumping. Dreamweavers is a bunch of floating islands, that sounds like foreshadowing, and has these cannons that grow or shrink enemies. Dark Passage as you go through this cave fighting turtles and lava beasts that change size. Lofty Castle is this really elaborate windy palace that has you save these fairies to create whirlwinds which let you reach higher areas. Icy Flight has chests, lights, trains, and copters, and it's the only one where you want to get multiple types of objects at once. And Haunted Towers has you use the super flame to destroy these knights. The boss is Jacques because he is French, and he throws boxes at you and runs away, but at least you have to do some platforming. This brings us to the final area, Nork Nexus, and what's funny is here all the dragons are ones you already saved but then got captured again. This area is pathetically small and only has 2 levels, Nork Cove, which has you launch these barrels, I smell copyright infringement, and Twilight Harbor, where the enemies are packing heat. In the original anyway, the remaster has them shoot these goo guns, which contrary to popular belief, was a stylistic choice to make this look more like a goo factory and not censorship. Now we finally fight Nasty Nork, and surprise, the fight is awful. You chase down some thieves to get keys while he just stands here shooting little orbs at you, but only in this room. And then you chase him around this track, flame him, go along these platforms, flame him again, and he's dead. Why is this guy a threat again? Spyro then returns to the interview, yeah, remember that, where he says Nasty Nork is toast. The credits roll, and in the original we got these fun sweeping shots of all the locations in the game, but in the remaster it's just a black screen with some concept art. Kinda sad. Also, apparently no sheep were harmed during the making of this game.
Yeah, I don't buy it.
This lets us save the 80th and final dragon, and if you collected everything in the game, you unlock one final level, Nasty's Loot. Although apparently there's a glitch in the remaster where if you got everything before beating Nasty, it becomes impossible to unlock, so might want to be on the safe side and leave a couple of gems. This is a massive level filled to the brim with extra gems to collect. You can free fly here, but only up to levels you've reached on land. It's really fun to explore, and an awesome reward for getting everything. Collect all the extra gems, and the game becomes 120% complete. Wow, that's a lot. And Spyro does another interview where he claims Nasty was a worthy opponent before more dragons get crystallized. Here we go again, except no, because the next game completely drops this.
Spyro the Dragon is pretty fun. It's definitely a bit simple by today's standards, but I think it's still worth playing since the only major flaw it has is the boss fights. If you're a fan of 3D platformers, then the Reignited trilogy is a must-own, and I definitely say you should pick it up. But there is one problem that needs to be solved. If Spyro and Crash followed the exact same patterns in life, and Crash got a brand new game after his remaster, then where the hell's our new Spyro game?